Hi, I'm Oskar from Avid. As a recording engineer, capturing the best performance possible will always be the main objective in the studio. To do this, any distractions should be eliminated to ensure that the talent can give their full attention to the performance. One of these distractions is latency, which can be very noticeable to the performer. In this video, we'll have a closer look at why low latency is so important and just how much faster Protus Carbon actually is than your standard core audio interface. Let's start off by listening to a latency comparison between a native system and Protus Carbon. In this first example, we'll be recording an electric guitar through a core audio interface running Pro Tools natively. The guitar is now plugged in as a direct input. Therefore, I've added some plugins to emulate a guitar amp. This requires more processing on our native CPU, which has forced me to increase the hardware buffer size, which has also increased the input latency. But more on that later. For now, let's have a listen. In this example, the guitar player will hit every note on the beat, right where he is supposed to hit them. What you will hear is what the guitarist would hear in his headphones. Let's have a listen. As you can hear, when recording in a situation like this, the audio from the guitar is out of sync. Now, let's plug the guitar into Protus Carbon and use the low latency Dsp mode in Pro Tools. Thanks to the technology of the Pro Tools hybrid engine and Protus Carbon, the latency is drastically reduced. Let's have a listen. That's a lot better and syncs up perfectly with what the guitarist is intending to play. So, now that we have heard the difference, let's dive a bit deeper to understand how Protus Carbon can deliver the signal that much faster. In order to measure latency in a recording system, we need to measure the total round-trip time. It's the time it takes for the audio to travel from the microphone through the DAW and out to the headphones. When recording in any digital system, we use an audio interface to convert the analog audio to a digital signal through an AD or audio to digital conversion. The same is true when the digital signal needs to be converted back to analog for a monitor or headphone outputs. This conversion adds a small amount of latency and differs between different conversion chips. So, let's have a look at how the signal is recorded and monitored in a native system. Here, the audio is sent from the interface to the native Pro Tools mixer, where the signal is processed and recorded. We typically monitor directly from the record or auxiliary track in Pro Tools. Since the Pro Tools mixer has to process the audio before it can be sent to the headphones, it will add additional latency to the signal. How much depends on how the DAW is set up. This latency is determined by the hardware buffer size that can be adjusted within the Playback Engine tab in Pro Tools. The logic behind it is very simple. The lower the value, the lower the latency, but the less time for the CPU to process the signal. On the flip side, the higher the value, the more time for the CPU to process the signal, but naturally, this results in more latency. Generally, we're not concerned with input latency when mixing. Therefore, higher values are preferred as it allows us to maximize the potential of the computer's CPU. For recording, on the other hand, the highest values are less than ideal as we will have too much latency in the headphones. Here, we want the lowest possible value to avoid any distracting latency. However, as we reduce the computer's processing time, we're more likely to get CPU errors as we record. It's especially problematic when we start adding plugins, record multiple tracks, or record in large sessions with complex routing. The bottom line is, in a native system, it will be a constant manual balancing act between latency and performance. In the ideal situation, we would want the lowest latency with the maximum CPU performance. This is exactly what the hybrid engine was created for, and this is how it works. When monitoring with Pro Tools Carbon and the hybrid engine, it lets us bypass the native Pro Tools mixer and its latency caveats when recording. Here, the audio is sent to Pro Tools to be recorded, but the monitor signal uses the onboard DSP chips on Pro Tools Carbon to process audio, plugins, and to route the signal straight to your headphones. Also, thanks to the hybrid engine, all of the tracks in your Pro Tools session are summed with your monitor signal and played back in perfect sync. The DSP chips process the audio a lot quicker than the native mixer and provides monitoring with sub 1 millisecond latency, no matter what your hardware buffer size is set to. This means that you don't have to worry about the hardware buffer size setting. Simply put it to its maximum value and forget about it. This lets you make use of the full potential of your native CPU and dedicate the DSP chips to handle the low latency tracking duties. To put a track into DSP mode in Pro Tools, click the Dsp Mode button and the track and anything downstream will automatically be processed on the DSP chips. To guarantee the lowest possible latency, any native plugins in the chain will automatically be converted to a DSP version if available. If not available, the native plugins will automatically be bypassed. AAX DSP plugins are designed to be part of the record chain and will only add a small amount of latency per plugin in use. Whenever you're done recording, clicking the Dsp Mode button again automatically puts the track and its plugins back in the native domain to be processed by the computer's CPU. Finally, let's look at some numbers comparing the round-trip latency of Pro Tools Carbon in DSP mode to third-party core audio interfaces. For as fair a comparison as possible, an average round-trip value was taken for measuring the round-trip latency on some of the most popular core audio interfaces on the market. All measurements were done at 48K, but it's worth mentioning that doubling your sample rate will have the round-trip latency, but it requires a lot more processing power. Core audio interfaces with the lowest latency setting at 32 samples will give you an average of 5.6 millisecond round-trip latency. Bumping up the buffer size setting will increase the latency in logarithmical steps. At the maximum setting, we measured an average of 46.9 milliseconds. But even at the lowest buffer setting in a native system, which will put a lot of pressure on your system, we're not reaching the DSP latency number. At 48K, Pro Tools Carbon's total round trip is only 0.79 milliseconds. That's how long it takes for sound to travel around 27 centimeters or 10 inches through air. To put that into perspective, if you were to record an acoustic guitar, drums, or basically any other instrument, the microphone signal would reach your ear through the headphones before the direct sound of the actual instrument. To have that direct feedback makes the talent more comfortable and gives them more confidence, which naturally results in an overall better performance when recording in the studio. I hope this video gave you a better perspective on how Pro Tools Carbon compares to standard audio interfaces. As even small amounts of latency will most likely affect the outcome of a performance, Pro Tools Carbon guarantees a low latency path no matter what your recording situation is. To get more information about Pro Tools Carbon and the Pro Tools Hybrid Engine, visit avid.com.